The scent of rosemary chicken, her favorite since she was 7, still hung warm in the air. I'd set the table with the good china, the plates with the delicate blue rim we only used for birthdays and accomplishments. This wasn't either, not exactly. It was a Tuesday. I just wanted to see her smile. She was scrolling on her phone, her dinner half-eaten, her posture a languid slump of entitlement. I'd asked about her day, about the big project at work she'd been so stressed over. My question hung in the air, unanswered, before she finally looked up. Her eyes, the same shade of hazel as her father's, didn't see me. They saw an interruption. "Mom, can you not? I'm trying to decompress." "I just thought we could talk, sweetheart. It feels like we haven't connected in." "Connected?" She cut me off, a short, sharp laugh escaping her lips. "What does that even mean? You're always just here, hovering, asking questions. It's suffocating." The word landed like a physical blow. Suffocating. All the packed lunches, the science fair projects, the tears wiped away after failed exams, all of it, reduced to a weight she carried. I took a steadying breath, my voice soft, pleading. "Clara, I'm your mother. I'm just trying to be involved in your life." She put her phone down with a definitive click. Her gaze was flat, final. "You want to be involved? You want to give me a real gift, the best gift you could give me?" She paused, letting the silence stretch, her eyes cold and clear. "Is leaving for good." The world didn't shatter, it froze. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall ceased. The steam rising from the rosemary chicken vanished. I felt the air leave my lungs, not in a gasp, but in a slow, painful leak. My daughter, my own child, the center of my universe for 25 years, had looked at me and seen nothing but an obstacle. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every word of encouragement I'd ever offered was washed away in that single, casually cruel sentence. My heart didn't just break. It twisted into a knot of pure, undiluted grief. I don't know how long I stood there after she left the room, the sound of her bedroom door closing echoing like a gunshot in the silent house. My legs felt numb. I moved on autopilot, clearing the plates, washing the china with hands that trembled so violently I nearly dropped the soup bowl she'd chipped as a child. I ended up in the living room, standing before the large mirror that hung over the fireplace. The woman who looked back was a stranger. Her shoulders were slumped, her eyes hollowed out with a pain so profound it seemed to have aged her a decade in a single moment. "My name is Helena Rivers," I whispered to the reflection, the sound alien in the quiet. The name felt unfamiliar on my tongue. Who was Helena Rivers? I hadn't been her in a very long time. For 25 years, I had been Clara's mom. My identity had been a satellite to hers, my orbit defined by her needs, her dreams, her life. I'd given up my job as a junior graphic designer when she was born, choosing freelance work I could do from home. I'd let my own friendships fade, my hobbies gather dust in the attic, all to be her constant, her rock. And now, that rock was a millstone around her neck, suffocating. I traced the lines around my eyes in the mirror, lines earned from smiling at her school plays, from squinting in the sun at soccer games, from worrying during her teenage rebellions. I realized, with a chilling clarity, that love alone doesn't always protect you from cruelty. The person you would lay down your life for can still look straight through you and see nothing of value. The foundation of my entire adult life had just been declared invalid. I didn't go to her room. I didn't knock on her door and demand to know how she could say such a thing. There was no yelling, no pleading, no desperate quest for an explanation that would make it better. The finality in her voice had been absolute. Instead, I walked slowly up the stairs to my own bedroom, the one I'd shared with her father until his heart gave out 5 years ago. Another loss. Another man who had left me, though his departure had been unwilling. This room held the ghost of his love and the crushing weight of my daughter's rejection. I closed the door and leaned against it, the solid wood a feeble barrier against the hurricane in my heart. And then the tears came. They were silent, desperate things, wrenching their way out of me without a sound. I slid down the length of the door to the floor, pulling my knees to my chest, making myself as small as the child I felt like. From down the hall, I could hear the faint sound of her laughter. She was on the phone, talking to a friend, her voice light and animated. The sound was a dagger twisting deeper. Her world had not ended. Mine had, and she was laughing through the rubble. I cried for the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. I cried for the teenager who'd confided in me about her first crush. I cried for the woman I had slowly erased in the process of raising her. I let the weight of her words sink fully into my soul, a poison I had no choice but to absorb. This was the truth of our relationship now. I was a burden, and a burden, by its very nature, must be cast aside. I must have fallen asleep on the floor, because I woke with a stiff neck and the dawn light filtering through the window, painting gray stripes on the carpet. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in my chest, but something else had crystallized around it in the cold light of morning. Resolve. I would not beg. I would not fight for a place in the life of someone who saw my presence as a punishment. For 25 years, my love had been unconditional. But my presence, I realized now, did not have to be. The decision settled over me not as a storm of emotion, but as a quiet, undeniable truth. I would leave, not in a dramatic, slamming door fury, not with vengeful words designed to wound as deeply as I had been wounded. I would leave decisively, calmly. I would give her exactly what she had asked for. The thought was terrifying. This house was my home. Every corner was saturated with memories. But it was no longer a home. It was a place where I was tolerated at best, where my love was considered a chore. I needed to reclaim my life. Not the life I'd had before her, that was impossible, but the life of the woman I still could be. Helena Rivers. The woman with a name, with dreams that had been shelved, with a spirit that had been compressed into the narrow, thankless role of mother. It was time to unpack her, to see what was left. Getting up from the floor, my joints protesting, I felt a strange sense of purpose. The pain was still acute, a fresh amputation, but the bleeding had stopped. The survival instinct, a thing I thought I'd lost, had kicked in. I found the old suitcases at the back of my closet, their surfaces dusty. I laid them open on my bed, their hollow interiors a blank canvas for my new, uncertain future. Then I began to pack. It was an archaeological dig through my own life. Each item was a stratum of memory. The photo album from her 5th birthday party, her face smeared with chocolate cake. The first drawing she ever gave me, a stick figure with a lopsided smile labeled Mommy. The pressed corsage from her senior prom. Each one was a shard of glass, beautiful and sharp, cutting my hands as I handled them. I packed my clothes, my books, my few pieces of jewelry. With every folded blouse, every placed book, I felt a simultaneous pang of loss and a flicker of liberation. It was a faint, almost heretical feeling. I was dismantling the museum of my motherhood, and with each artifact I boxed up, I was lightening a load I hadn't even known I was carrying. I was giving her exactly what she wanted, and in doing so, for the first time in decades, I was giving myself something greater, a choice. The choice to no longer be where I was not wanted. The choice to prioritize my own oxygen before attempting to breathe for someone else. The suitcase latches clicked shut with a sound of finality. It was the sound of a door closing, but also, perhaps, of a window opening. Confrontation felt pointless. A scene would only give her more reason to see me as dramatic, as the source of the chaos she claimed I created. My departure would be as quiet and dignified as I could make it. Words had failed me at the dinner table. They would not fail me now. I sat at the small writing desk that had been my husband's, a smooth, worn piece of cherrywood. I took out a single sheet of my best stationery and a pen that felt solid in my hand. "My dearest Clara," I began. "You asked me for a gift, the best one I could possibly give. So I am giving it to you. I am leaving. This is not an act of anger, though my heart is broken. It is not an attempt to punish you, though the pain is profound. It is simply my acceptance of a truth you voiced so clearly. My presence in your life has become a burden, and that is a weight I can no longer bear to carry. I have spent 25 years loving you, supporting you, and building a world with you at its center. I do not regret a single moment of it, but I realize now that love cannot thrive where it is not welcome. It withers in the shade of resentment. I will always be your mother, and I will always love you, but I can no longer be your ghost. I hope, one day, you might understand. With all my love. Mom." I read it over once, my vision blurring. It was calm. It was truthful. It held no blame, only the stark reality of the situation. I propped it against the fruit bowl on the kitchen table where she would find it in the morning. Then I picked up my suitcases, walked out of the house, and did not look back. The apartment was a small, beige box on the other side of town. I'd rented it online a month ago, an impulsive, secret act I'd told myself was for a studio space, a place to paint again. Now it was my refuge. The silence was the first thing I noticed. It was different from the silence of my old house. That silence had been expectant, waiting to be filled by her return, her voice, her life. This silence was absolute. It pressed against my eardrums, a physical presence. I set my suitcases down in the middle of the bare living room, the sound echoing in the emptiness. I didn't unpack. I simply sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, and let the loss wash over me. The pain was a fresh, raw thing. Regret whispered in my ear. What have you done? You've abandoned your child. You've made her words real. The urge to call her, to go back, to forget the whole thing was a powerful, magnetic pull. But then I remembered the flatness in her eyes, the words suffocating. I had made a choice. A line had been drawn in the sand of my soul, and I had stepped over it. However painful this side was, it was mine. This emptiness belonged to me. This silence was mine to fill or not to fill as I chose. As the night deepened, the sharp edge of the pain began to dull, worn down by sheer exhaustion. And in its place, something else crept in. It was small, a tiny, fragile seedling, but it was undeniably there. It was the sense of being the author of my own story again, even if this chapter was heartbreaking. It was freedom. The morning sun through the bare window of the apartment felt accusatory. It illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air, the blank walls, the stark reality of my situation. But I had made a decision. I would not spend my days weeping on the floor. I started with my phone, a device that had largely become a conduit for messages to and from Clara. I scrolled past her name and found others, long dormant. Sarah from my old design course. Marie from the book club I'd quit a lifetime ago. My fingers trembled as I typed the messages. Hi, it's Helena. I know it's been a while, but I'd love to catch up if you're free. Then I went online. I found a community center a few blocks away. They offered a weekly watercolor class for beginners. I signed up, my heart pounding as I entered my payment details. It felt like a rebellion. I spent the day unpacking, not just my clothes, but myself. I hung a print I'd always loved, but that Clara had deemed too loud. I arranged my books on a makeshift shelf, not by genre, but by color, because I liked the way it looked. Each small, deliberate act was a whisper. I am here. My tastes matter. My preferences are valid. That evening, I met Sarah for coffee. The conversation was stilted at first, a bridge over a 20-year chasm. But then we laughed about our terrible professor, and for a glorious 10 minutes, I was Clara's mom or a grieving widow. I was just Helena. It was a muscle I hadn't used in so long it had atrophied, but the feeling of it flexing was exhilarating. I was reconnecting with parts of myself I had buried under decades of motherhood, and each reconnection was a small act of rebellion against erasure. Weeks had bled into a month. A new rhythm was establishing itself in my life, classes on Tuesdays, coffee with a friend on Thursdays, quiet evenings with a book or a sketchpad. The pain was still there, a constant, low-grade hum in the background, but it was no longer the only thing I could hear. Then my phone buzzed one afternoon. It was Clara. It was Maya, the daughter of a close friend, a girl Clara had grown up with. My breath hitched. Hi, Helena, Maya said, her voice hesitant. I hope it's okay that I called. Of course, Maya. Is everything all right? Yeah, everything's fine. It's just I saw Clara the other day. My heart twisted, a familiar, painful spasm. I said nothing, waiting. She asked about you, not directly, it was weird. She was like, have you talked to my mom lately? Is she okay? She seemed nervous. I closed my eyes, leaning against my kitchen counter. The news sent a confusing jolt through me, a flicker of validation, immediately followed by a wave of protective sadness. She was asking. My absence was creating a space she had begun to notice. I'm okay, Maya, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Thank you for telling me. After I hung up, I stood there for a long time. The old me would have seized this, would have called Clara immediately, would have rushed to fill that space with my presence, my reassurance. But the new me understood a painful truth. I had to see my own strength as something separate from her attention. My worth could not be contingent on her occasional, nervous curiosity. My silence, for now, was my strength. I agreed to meet Maya for coffee later that week. She chose a sunny corner cafe I'd never been to, a place devoid of memories. She was already there, her young face etched with a concern that made her look older. "She's really thrown, Helena," Maya said, stirring her latte. "She didn't think you'd actually do it. She's been complaining to anyone who will listen that you just left, that you're being dramatic, that you've abandoned her." I listened, sipping my black coffee. A strange, quiet feeling settled in my chest. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't schadenfreude. It was a deep, resonating sense of validation. My absence had weight. It had substance. It was causing ripples. "She's realizing that the world doesn't stop when she's having a bad day," Maya added softly. "And I don't think she likes it." I nodded. For so long, my constant presence had been a given, as reliable and unnoticed as the sunrise. My love had been the background music of her life, something she only noticed when it was gone, leaving an uncomfortable silence. She was complaining about my absence because, for the first time, she was being forced to confront the space I had occupied. The space where I had absorbed her frustrations, managed her crises, and softened her world. That space was now a vacuum, and nature, as they say, abhors a vacuum. I felt a flicker of something that, if I was honest, felt a little like satisfaction. Not from a place of revenge, but from the profound realization that my absence mattered more to her than my presence ever had when it wasn't respected. My pottery class was a disaster. My first attempt at a vase collapsed into a sad, muddy lump on the wheel. The woman next to me, a vibrant retiree named Gloria, laughed, not unkindly. "Well, it's got character," she said. "Try again. The clay is forgiving." I tried again and again. On the fourth try, I managed to create a lopsided, thick-walled cup. It was ugly. It was imperfect. It was entirely mine. I held it in my hands, caked in wet clay, and I laughed. A real, genuine laugh that bubbled up from a place I thought had dried up and blown away. It was the first time I had laughed like that in months, perhaps years. The sound was foreign and wonderful in my ears. That small, ugly cup became a symbol. I took it home, let it dry, and painted it a reckless, joyful cobalt blue. I placed it on the windowsill where the sun hit it in the mornings. Every time I looked at it, I didn't see a failed pot. I saw the victory of trying. The victory of creating something, however flawed, just for me. Joy wasn't just a memory or a distant hope. It was possible. It was mine to claim, cup by lopsided cup, class by class, coffee date by coffee date. I was reclaiming myself, chapter by messy, imperfect, beautiful chapter. The text came on a Saturday morning. I was in the middle of sketching the view from my apartment window, something I hadn't done since art school. The buzz of my phone was an intrusion. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in weeks, Clara. The message was simple, stark in its ambiguity. "Are you really gone?" 4 words, no apology, no warmth, just a question seeking confirmation of a reality she had authored but apparently couldn't comprehend. The old Helena, the mother, would have pounced on this. She would have written back paragraphs, explaining, reassuring, begging for a chance to reconnect. She would have seen it as an opening, a lifeline. The new Helena set the phone down. I looked at my sketch, at the lines I'd drawn, capturing the way the light hit the brick wall of the building across the street. My lines, my perspective. I picked up my pencil and continued to draw. I did not respond. I let the question hang in the digital ether, unanswered. I had learned the immense, formidable power of quiet dignity. In that moment, my silence spoke louder than any words I could have possibly typed. Life began to knit itself into a new pattern. Gloria from the pottery class invited me to her weekly book club. I went, nervous, feeling like an imposter. The group was a mix of ages and backgrounds, teachers, artists, a nurse, a woman who ran her own bakery. We discussed the novel, but we also discussed politics and travel and the best way to grow tomatoes on a balcony. I didn't say much that first time, but I listened. I laughed. I felt the simple, profound pleasure of belonging to a group that asked nothing of me but my presence. They didn't know I was Clara's mom. They knew me as Helena, the woman who made the lopsided blue cup. I also met my next-door neighbor, an elderly Polish man named Mr. Petrov, who gifted me a jar of his homemade pickles and asked me to check his mail when he visited his granddaughter. It was a small, neighborly transaction, but it made me feel grounded, part of a community. This sense of belonging was different from the one I'd known. It wasn't based on duty or biology. It was chosen. It was light. Life was moving forward, not around the crater Clara had left, but on a new path altogether. A path without chaos, without disrespect, and for the first time in a long time, without guilt. One evening, I sat on the floor of my apartment. I still didn't have much furniture, with a glass of wine, looking at the city lights twinkling outside my window. The silence was no longer oppressive. It was peaceful. It was mine. I reflected on the journey of the last few months, the searing pain of Clara's words, the terrifying decision to leave, the hollow ache of the first night, the tentative, brave steps toward a new life. And I realized something fundamental. Her words, as cruel as they were, had been a catalyst. They were the shock to the system that my soul had needed. I had been sleepwalking through my own life, my identity fused so completely with motherhood that I had lost all sense of my own edges. Leaving wasn't the end of my story. It was the brutal, painful beginning of a new one, a chapter where I was no longer a supporting character, a ghost in the narrative of someone else's life. I was the protagonist. The choices were mine. The mistakes would be mine. The triumphs, however small, would be mine. Her rejection had not diminished me. It had, paradoxically, forced me to expand. To fill the space I was meant to occupy all along. The space labeled Helena. My phone rang again. Clara. This time I answered, not with the desperate hope of before, but with a calm curiosity. Mom. Her voice was hesitant, smaller than I remembered. Hello, Clara. I can't find the warranty for the washing machine. Do you know where it is? It was such a mundane, practical question. The kind of question that, for years, had been my purpose. The keeper of the warranties, the solver of the problems. It's in the top drawer of the filing cabinet, in the green folder labeled Appliances. Oh, okay, thanks. A pause. I could hear her breathing. I said nothing. And the number for the gardener. The lawn is getting long. It's on the fridge, Clara, under the pineapple magnet. Another pause, longer this time. The subtext was screamingly loud. She wasn't just asking for phone numbers and warranties. She was testing the waters. She was realizing the 1,000 tiny ways I had managed her life, the infrastructure of support she had taken for granted. Okay, well, thanks. You're welcome. I ended the call. A small, quiet smile touched my lips. I was no longer at her beck and call, the ever-present administrator of her life. I was a reference librarian, and she had just learned she needed to check out her own books. On a whim, I booked a weekend trip to a small coastal town I'd always wanted to visit. I didn't plan an itinerary. I just went. I walked along the windswept beach, the salt spray stinging my cheeks. I wandered into tiny art galleries, chatting with the owners about their work. I sat in a cafe overlooking the water and ate a whole piece of peach pie without sharing. I breathed in the briny air and felt it fill lungs that had been constricted for years. I laughed when a sudden wave soaked my shoes. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years, not as an extension of someone else, but as a singular, complete being having an experience all her own. Each step on the damp sand, each conversation with a stranger, each moment of solitary contentment was a brick in the foundation of my new life. They were small, simple bricks, but they were strong. They were laid with the mortar of my own choices. This trip, this freedom, this joy, it wasn't an escape. It was a homecoming to myself. I was repotting a fern on my tiny balcony when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Wiping my hands on my jeans, I opened the door to find Sarah standing there, a bottle of wine in one hand and a mischievous grin on her face. "Surprise," she said. "I was in the neighborhood, thought I'd see how the artist is living." I let her in, a sudden self-consciousness washing over me. The apartment was small, my furniture was secondhand, my art was amateur. But Sarah didn't seem to notice any of that. She walked in, her eyes scanning the space, taking in my cobalt blue cup on the windowsill, my sketches taped to the wall, the thriving fern. "Helena," she said, turning to me, her grin softening into something more genuine. "You look wonderful. You seem so at peace. It's radiant." Radiant, the word hung in the air. I hadn't been called radiant since before I was a mother. I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of the television. My hair was a mess, I had dirt on my cheek, but my eyes had a light in them I didn't recognize. Sarah was right. Leaving wasn't just about absence. It was about becoming visible again, to others, and most importantly, to myself. The grapevine of a family is a powerful thing. My sister, Lynn, called. "I heard from Margaret, who heard from Brenda, that you've moved out." Her voice was laced with confusion and a touch of disapproval. "What's going on, Helena? Is everything okay with Clara?" I didn't offer a long, detailed defense. I didn't throw Clara under the bus. I simply said, "Clara and I are in a period of transition. I needed some space for myself. I'm doing well, Lynn. Thank you for asking." My calm, non-combative tone seemed to throw her. The family was talking. The narrative of the dramatic, abandoning mother wasn't holding up against the reality of my steady, peaceful demeanor. I heard, through the indirect channels, that Clara had noticed the shift. Her tone in subsequent calls to family members had softened, become less accusatory, more bewildered. She was realizing that the world and her family saw me not as a villain, but as a person who had made a difficult choice. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I simply observed from my quiet apartment, knowing that my dignity was intact. I had not fought her in the mud. I had simply walked away and started building a garden on clean, higher ground. The message came late one night. A text, longer than the others. "Mom, I was going through some old boxes today. I found the scrapbook you made me for my high school graduation. I'd forgotten about it. I read through the whole thing, all your notes, every picture you glued in. I didn't realize what it meant to lose you." The words were a punch to the gut, but of a different kind. It didn't bring the sharp pain of fresh betrayal, but the deep, resonant ache of a truth finally acknowledged. It was validation, but it was also profoundly sad. It had taken a scrapbook, a relic of my love, for her to even begin to understand its value. I read the message 3 times. I felt the sting of tears, but they were clean tears. Tears of grief for the time lost, for the pain caused, but also tears of release. I didn't reply immediately. I sat with the feeling. She was finally starting to understand the weight of her words, the weight of my absence. The scales were tipping, and the counterbalance was the sheer, accumulated mass of a mother's love, now gone from her daily life. The community center where I took my art classes had a youth outreach program. They put out a call for mentors for young women interested in the arts. On a whim, I volunteered. My first mentee was a shy, fiercely talented 16-year-old named Chloe who was terrified to show her work to anyone. We sat with her portfolio, and I saw the same self-doubt I'd seen in Clara, the same need for validation. But my approach was different now. I didn't smother her with praise or try to fix her problems. I asked questions. I pointed out the strengths in her line work. I talked about the importance of developing a thick skin, of setting boundaries to protect one's creative spirit. I shared stories of my own artistic insecurities. Helping her, guiding her without seeking anything in return, reminded me that my capacity to love and nurture was not broken. It hadn't diminished. It had simply been redirected. It was no longer poured exclusively into a bottomless well of ingratitude. It was being given freely to someone who was receptive, and in the giving, it was watering my own parched spirit. My love was finding new, fertile ground in which to grow. My nephew was having a birthday party. It was the first large family gathering I would attend since leaving. I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach. I wore a new dress, a color I'd never worn before, a bold, coral red. I saw her the moment I walked in. She was standing by the punch bowl just as I had at her ill-fated engagement party. Our eyes met across the room. The chatter seemed to fade. I saw a whirlwind of emotions on her face: surprise, guilt, uncertainty. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. Then, she offered a hesitant, almost shy smile. It wasn't the triumphant smile of my daughter, nor the cold smirk of my adversary. It was the tentative smile of someone seeing a stranger they hoped they could get to know. I didn't rush over. I didn't freeze. I simply returned the smile. It was warm, genuine, and most importantly, it was calm. It held no expectation, no demand, no lingering hurt. It was just a smile. In that silent exchange, I showed her that the foundation of my being was no longer shaky ground susceptible to her moods. My calm confidence was a fortress that could not be shaken. After the party, the calls began to change. They were no longer just about misplaced warranties. She called to ask my opinion on a work dilemma. She called to tell me about a movie she'd seen, wondering if I'd like it. She called once just to hear about my pottery class. "Is it hard?" she asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. "It is," I'd replied, "but I like the challenge." There was a new tone in her voice, a tone of respect. She was noticing my life as something separate from hers, something with its own texture and value. She was seeking my advice not as a default administrator, but as a person whose judgment she trusted. I realized the profound truth of the old adage. Sometimes, absence does speak louder than presence. My constant, available presence had been a given, a piece of furniture she'd never had to notice. My absence was a missing wall, letting in a draft she couldn't ignore. She was finally feeling the space where I had always been, and she was discovering, to her surprise, that it was a space she missed. She asked to meet me, not at the house, not at a family event, but at a quiet park bench overlooking the lake. It was a neutral place, a place for conversations that mattered. I arrived first. I watched the ducks glide across the water, their passage smooth and untroubled. When she sat down beside me, I could feel the nervous energy radiating from her. She didn't speak for a long time. "I've had a lot of time to think," she began, her voice soft, her eyes fixed on the water. "I've been going through things in the house, all my old stuff, and it's all you, Mom. Every award I won, you were there taking the picture. Every report card, you signed it. Every broken heart, you were there." She swallowed hard. "I look at my life now and it feels hollow. I miss you. I miss you so much it hurts. And I took you for granted. I took all of it for granted." I didn't realize what I had until I was the one looking at an empty chair. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't offer comfort. I simply let her speak, let the words she had held back for months tumble out in a raw, honest confession. She was finally seeing the mosaic of my love, not as a single, smothering tile, but as the entire picture that had held her world together. There was no shouting, no dramatic reconciliation. Just the quiet, crushing weight of her realization and the steady, calm presence of my forgiveness, which I had already granted to myself. My absence had made her finally, truly see my value. When her words subsided into quiet tears, I handed her a tissue. I waited for her to compose herself. "Thank you for telling me that, Clara," I said, my voice even. "It means a great deal to me." She looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed and hopeful. Can you come home?" I shook my head, slowly, gently. "No, sweetheart, I can't." The hope in her eyes flickered and died, replaced by fresh pain. "That house is part of the old story," I explained. "My home is my apartment now, my life is there. My friends are there, my art is there." "So that's it," she whispered, a tremor in her voice. "No," I said, reaching out and taking her hand. It was the first time we had touched in months. "That's not it at all. I would like very much to have a relationship with you, a new one, but it has to be on different terms." I looked her squarely in the eyes, my gaze firm but loving. "I will be your mother. I will love you, support you, and be there for you. But I will not be your ghost. I will not be taken for granted. I will not absorb your disrespect. My love for you is unconditional, but my presence is not." It was the establishment of a boundary, not as a wall, but as a bridge with strong railings. I was offering a reconciliation, but not a regression. I would reconnect not as the person at her constant beck and call, but as Helena Rivers, a mother with her own dignity, her own life, and her own unshakable self-respect. My love remained, vast and deep, but my independence was now its non-negotiable foundation. Life moved forward, but the axis had shifted. Clara and I had dinner every other week. Sometimes she came to my apartment and I cooked for her in my small kitchen. Sometimes we went out. The conversations were different, more honest, more respectful. She asked about my life. She listened to the answers. I had left just as she had asked, but in leaving, I had found myself. My home was filled with my own choices, the art on the walls, the plants on the balcony, the quiet hum of a life being lived on its own terms. My joy was no longer a derivative of hers. It was a well I drew from myself. My passions, long dormant, were now a vibrant part of my daily existence. I looked at my daughter, who was slowly, painstakingly, learning how to have a mother who was also a person, and I felt a peace that surpassed the need for any apology. The ultimate gift I had given wasn't revenge or punishment. It was the gift of a living example. I had shown her, and more importantly, I had shown myself, that true love never, ever requires the sacrifice of one's own soul. It is possible to love fiercely and still hold onto the beautiful, necessary, and whole person you are. I had given her the gift of my absence, and in return, I had given myself the greatest gift of all, my own, reclaimed, radiant life.